Hey Vikings, welcome in. All right, we're almost done with macroeconomics. We've got one unit left to go. We're on unit 6, the open economy. Basically talks about international trade and finance. We'll look at the balance of payments accounts, and then we'll look at exchange rates and the foreign exchange market, basically. So this is actually from the old curriculum, but most of the stuff really does still hold true. An open economy interacts with the rest of the world both through the goods market and the financial markets. And it's important to understand how a country's transactions with the rest of the world are recorded in the balance of payments accounts. Students should understand the meaning of trade balance, the distinction between the current account balance, and now we call it the capital and financial account, which basically covers financial assets, and the implications of the foreign exchange market. So the course should also focus on the foreign exchange market and examine how the equilibrium exchange rate is determined, right? Basically just through supply and demand, market forces. Students should understand how the market forces and public policy affect currency demand and currency supply in the foreign exchange markets and lead to currency appreciation or currency depreciation. How financial capital flows affect exchange rates and how appreciation or depreciation of a currency affects a country's exports and imports should really be an integral part of the class. Having learned the mechanics of the foreign exchange market, students should then understand how changes in net exports and financial capital flows affect financial and goods markets. So it's important to examine what effects trade restrictions have and how the international payment systems hinders or facilitates trades, how domestic policy affect international finance and trade, and how international exchange rates affect American policy goals or foreign policy goals. All right, so imports and exports. Let's review. What are imports and what are exports? Well, imports are goods or services brought into a country from abroad. So anything that's made in a foreign country and then is sold here in America or brought here to America to be sold, we would call that an import. So everything you have that says made in China. Like I have this thing in front of me right here. This was an apple that I got from North High. It's like a little stress ball. And it says made in China at the bottom there. So this is definitely an import. An export would be a good or service sent to another country for sale. So exports are things made here domestically, but then exported or exiting this country and then going to another country to be sold, basically. So remember the formula for net exports, or XN, is exports minus imports. We don't count the imports because we didn't make them domestically. We do count the exports, though, because they were made here. So they are part of our economy. They are part of our GDP. Okay, so this whole section and topic is basically just about the two types of account. We have the current account and then what's now called the capital and financial account. The current account, basically, I try to remember this thinking of like, these are things that you're currently using. They're not going to be things that earn money in the future. They're not going to be for the future. So current account is made up of three parts. It's trades in goods and services, so net exports, the difference between our exports and imports in goods and services. So an example would be toys imported from China, or if we exported cars to Mexico. Investment income, so income from the factors of production, including payments made to foreign investors, so money earned by Japanese car producers in the US. Net transfers also. Money flows from private or public sector. The United States sends public aid to lots of different foreign countries. So that's a transfer payment, right? We don't send that money with the expectation that they will provide a good or service in return. It's just sent there, needs-based, or it's also a way that we can make friendships with foreign countries too. It's always a good way to make friends if you send them money. But also American citizens and immigrants that come to here will send money abroad to family members or friends, basically. And that also are transfer payments that would go in the current account, basically. We call money sent to family members remittance. The capital and financial account is basically measures the purchase and sale of financial assets abroad. So these are sales of assets that will continue to earn money. So an example would be if you bought a factory in Ohio, that would continue to earn money, basically. Or if you bought a foreign bond, a Japanese government bond, that would continue to earn money in the future. So how I remember is that the current account is stuff that's going to be currently bought and sold and used. The capital and financial account is going to be financial assets, basically, stuff that will continue to earn money in the future. Okay, so the balance of trade is the difference in value between a country's imports and their exports. So net exports, again, is exports minus imports. Trade surplus is when you export more than you import, basically. So China, for example, routinely runs trade surpluses. They export lots of goods and they don't import as many goods. So they generally run a trade surplus. The United States, on the other hand, usually runs what we call a trade deficit, or sometimes called a trade gap. And it just means that we're exporting less than we're importing, basically. We're not sending products to foreign countries as much as we're bringing in, and we're buying products from foreign countries. So the current account is made up of three parts. You've got the trades in goods and services. I talked about that. You've got the investment income, and then you've got the net transfers. The capital and financial account is the capital and financial account measures the purchase and sale of financial assets abroad. So these are purchase of things that will continue to earn money, basically, continue to earn money and earn assets. So a Korean company buys a factory in Ohio, that's an asset that will continue to earn money, basically, right? Or if you buy a bond, that will also continue to earn money. When a foreign company buys a business in a different country, we call that foreign direct investment. And so we have what we call net capital outflow. Net capital outflow. And by capital, they're referring to basically financial capital, basically, not the tools and machinery that we're usually referring to when we talk about capital. The difference between the purchase of foreign assets and domestic assets purchased by foreigners, basically. You could have a financial account surplus, which means your inflow, money coming into your country, is greater than your outflow. Or you could have a financial account deficit. That means your outflow is greater than your inflow, basically. So more money is leaving your country, basically. And there's different reasons why money would be leaving your country. Maybe interest rates are higher in another country, or there's depreciation of a currency that maybe makes people want to demand that currency more. So now let's talk about the Forex markets. So in the Forex market or foreign exchange market, one currency is exchanged for another. The price of one currency in terms of another is what we call the exchange rate. This can be a little bit confusing for students sometimes because we don't demand US dollars as a foreign currency because we, as people living in America, we earn US dollars in our income, basically. But if I was to travel to a foreign country, I would demand that foreign currency, and I need to exchange my dollars for that foreign currency, basically. So appreciate just means the currency is valued more and the exchange rate is higher. Appreciated currency means it's going to take more units of some other currency to get your hands on that appreciated currency. Depreciate is just the opposite. Depreciate is the currency is valued less and the exchange rate is actually lower, basically. So a depreciated currency means you need less of the units of a foreign currency to get your hands on that depreciated currency. So exchange rate determination, how do we determine the exchange rate? Well, it's market forces, basically. It's supply and demand, because most countries have what we call a floating exchange rate. It's not fixed by the government. It's actually floating and set by market forces, basically. So the equilibrium exchange rate, right, X marks the spot, is where basically supply and demand for currency intersect. So demand for a currency arises from the demand for the country's goods and services and their financial assets. Demand is an inverse relationship. That's why our demand curve is downward sloping. Supply of a currency arises from making payments in other currencies. Because if you demand one currency, you're going to have to supply your currency to go ahead and demand that currency to get the other currency, basically. So supply is a positive relationship. It's upward sloping. Disequilibrium exchange rates creates what we call surpluses and shortages in the foreign exchange market. And so it's these market forces that really drive down the exchange rates towards equilibrium. If the exchange rate is too high, then people demand that currency less. And so eventually there's going to be a surplus of that currency. So that will eventually drive down the exchange rate, or vice versa if it's valued too low. Then there'll be lots of quantity demanded for that. So the foreign exchange market, global decentralized market for the trading of currencies. The exchange rate is the value of one currency relative to another currency. For this class, we will always be only using two currencies. Okay, to make it simple, we will not be bringing in multiple currencies. It makes it way too complicated. So for this class, you're always going to be comparing two currencies, basically two markets or two different currencies. And they'll sometimes change them up on the test. Sometimes they'll use pesos or dollars or euros or yen. It doesn't matter. None of the concepts change depending on what currency it is. So you could have a floating or flexible exchange rate. That's determined by the market forces of supply and demand. It's also possible to have a fixed exchange rate. That's a rate that's determined by governments. That's pegged by governments, usually tied to some sort of, gold reserves or something that the country has in reserves, basically. So currency appreciation versus depreciation. What does it mean, appreciation? It's an increase in the value of one currency in terms of another. Depreciation is the decrease in the value of one currency in terms of another. Here's a magical macro tip. If you're doing these problems and you think both currencies appreciate or both currencies depreciate, you are wrong. It is not possible. When one currency appreciates, by definition, the other currency has to depreciate. So no two currencies will appreciate or depreciate at the same time. They're going to have this inverse relationship, basically. So if the dollar appreciates compared to the euro, then we know that the euro then must have depreciated. So increase in demand for a currency will also cause it to appreciate, basically. People want the currency more. Decrease in demand will cause it to depreciate, basically. People don't want the currency. There's not as much demand. It's going to cause a depreciation, less value. So both factors that shift the demand for currencies, such as demand for the country's goods and services, and factors that shift supply of currency, such as tariffs or quotas on other countries' goods and services, change the equilibrium exchange rate. So if there's trade restrictions, that's going to affect supply or even demand for that currency. And then same thing too, if there's like one of our shifters is taste and preferences. So if there's increased taste and preferences or increased tourism to a certain area, we're going to see an appreciated currency there, because more demand for that currency will then appreciate the currency. So it's important to know that fiscal policy can influence aggregate demand, real output, price level, and then also exchange rates, basically. Fiscal policy can affect the price level by shifting aggregate demand. It can affect the price level, and then that can affect the demand for our net exports. When our price level goes up in the United States, foreign countries don't want our products as much because they're relatively more expensive, basically, comparatively. Monetary policy can do just the same. Monetary policy can influence aggregate demand, and that can influence output and price level, and interest rates, which also influence exchange rates, basically. And so that's why usually on the AP test, they'll usually bring in the exchange rates into the discussion in fiscal and monetary policy, understanding those connections between all of those, basically. So just remember that fiscal and monetary policy is all about shifting aggregate demand. And so that then does have an effect on price level, and it has effect on real output, and that affects demand for our products, depending on what our price level is, basically. Factors that cause a currency to appreciate cause that country's exports to decrease and imports to increase. As a result, net exports will decrease, basically. So when our currency appreciates, it actually decreases our net exports, because then it becomes more expensive to buy our products, to buy our exports, basically. But factors that cause a currency to depreciate cause that country's exports to increase and its imports to decrease. So as a result, net exports will actually increase. So for this whole topic, you just need to remember this, that a change in the international value of a country's currency can drastically affect their exports and imports. So if there's appreciation of a currency, that country's net exports will decrease. If there's depreciation of a currency, that country's net exports will increase. And the reason why is because when the currency becomes appreciated, it becomes more expensive for foreigners to get their hands on that currency. So they don't want as many of the products, basically. But when it becomes depreciated, all of a sudden it's really attractive because it's much cheaper to get your hands on that currency, basically. So this is how it looks like on a graph. You can graph out both of these, both of the markets, and that's often what I do, just so I can keep my market straight, basically. But on the AP test, they will tell you graph this, graph the dollar market or graph the euro market. So currency appreciation makes exports more expensive and is likely to lead to an inward shift of AD. And then a currency appreciation makes imports cheaper and likely to cause an outward shift of aggregate supply. So demand and supply for Forex. What are the shifters for the foreign exchange markets? I'll give you a tip. All right, I'll give you a tip. It's TIIP, changes in tastes and preferences. So tourism, or if there's all of a sudden increased demand for a product, a foreign product, basically. Changes in income or wealth, because when our income goes up in a country, then we will demand more imports, basically, and that would decrease our net exports. Changes in interest rates. Just remember that interest rates attract foreign currency. High interest rates attract foreign currency. Because if we have a high interest rate in the United States, foreign investors want to take advantage. They want to buy our bonds, and they want to put their money, put money into our banks. So it actually, higher interest rates will appreciate a country's currency because of the foreign investment that's attracted to that. And then also changes in price level. Because if price level goes up in this country, all of a sudden foreigners don't want our products as much. They're relatively more expensive. But if price level goes down in this country, foreigners, all of a sudden, it's more attractive. So remember that tip: tastes and preferences, income, wealth, interest rates, and price level. Okay, so when you're graphing out the foreign exchange market, I've got two back-to-back right here so you can remember, because it does get a little confusing. On the left side, you're looking at the dollar market, okay? So how do I graph out the dollar market? Well, it's the dollar market, so quantity of dollars, And then what's the price of dollars? Well, it's in terms of euros, basically. So it's euros per dollar. How many euros do I have to supply to get my hands on $1, basically? So euros per dollar. In the euro market on the right-hand side, you're looking at the opposite, basically. It's quantity of euros. And then it's dollars per euro, basically. So what happens in one market also affects the other. So what happens if Europeans prefer vacationing in the United States? Well, all of a sudden, if Europeans want a vacation in the United States, that means that they will demand what? Well, to come to the United States, they can't spend their euros here. They're going to demand dollars. So that's going to increase the demand for dollars, which will appreciate the dollar because it's now got a higher exchange rate. But then what's happening in the euro market? Well, what do the European people have to supply to get their hands on dollars? They have to supply euros. So they're going to supply euros to that market, and that's going to decrease the interest rate. So what's happening is that the dollar appreciates and the euro then depreciates. So that's how that looks like on a graph. Again, on the AP test, they'll only have you graph out one market. So they're going to say graph the market for the euro, or graph the market for the dollar, whatever currency they're going to use. So whatever market they ask you to graph, remember, it's quantity of that currency, and then it's whatever the other unit is per the currency of the market that you're measuring there, basically. So euros per dollar in this case, or it's dollars per euro in the euro market. Okay, in an open economy, difference in real interest rates across countries change the relative value of foreign and domestic assets. Financial capital will flow toward a country with high interest rates. So let's remember that high interest rates attract foreign currency because rich people basically want to take advantage of a high interest rate. It gives them a higher rate of return. This can be confusing to students sometimes because we usually think high interest rates are bad because we're looking at it from the perspective of a consumer. And yeah, for a consumer or domestic consumer or domestic business, a high interest rate in the country would be bad for us because it would cost us more to borrow money. But for a foreigner, it's a high interest rate is something they can take advantage of and they can earn more money off of, basically. So central banks can influence the domestic interest rates in the short run, which also in turn can affect net capital inflows, right? The central bank can affect the money supply, and that affects the nominal interest rates. So that's it, friends. That's Unit 6, and we're done, basically. So I think the key tips to remember are make sure you practice the foreign exchange market. There's lots of great questions on it. In fact, I'm about to record a video right now to do some breakdowns of foreign exchange, but actually all our units, basically. Mr. Clifford has 2 awesome videos that I highly recommend. This is a 15-minute quick review, so you should definitely check that out. And I think that's the only one I have linked on here. Okay, sorry, Mr. Clifford. So there's also, it's everything you need to know. Everything you need to know, and that's a 30-minute video. It's a little bit longer. I think he talks a little bit slower, but it is very helpful. So as always, friends, thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. You're amazing people. Keep doing amazing things. And let me know if you have questions, if you need support with anything. I'm here to help you. I want you to succeed. You know, with everything, you just need to practice. The foreign exchange market can get a little confusing. It's easy to mix up your markets. So as always, it's really important to go slow. It's really important to just practice because lots of practice on these questions will really help you build up your confidence level so you know exactly what to answer and exactly how to graph that out on the AP exam. All right, friends. So I appreciate you. There's an economics joke for you. I appreciate you so much. And I just really appreciate just working with you. This was a great year. And you're going to nail that AP test, but you do have to practice. And please comment down below or email me if you have any questions. And cheers. I think as always, we just need to end this video how I end most of my videos. Keep calm and Viking on.